bear with me today. I am used to teaching in the galleries, and this is the first screen PowerPoint presentation that I have done in ages. So what I want to do today is talk to you about what it is like to teach in the gallery. And when you speak about teaching about art history, a lot of times you're out there, you can bring up any example in the world that you want to explain a point, to show a connection, to show influence. In the galleries in a museum, you don't have that option. You are teaching from the work of art that's in the galleries. Therefore, you have limitations, but you also have opportunities. And one of the things that I stress with my docents, and they can tell you ad nauseum that I stress this, is to talk about what you are seeing, to actually look at the object and talk about what is in front of you, to get people's reactions, to get people's contributions to the conversation. So what I'm going to do today is show you some of the areas in the collection that I do this with. And I do it for a variety of audiences. I do K through 12. I do adults. I do college colloquium classes quite often. So I'm going to give you some examples of the different audiences that I talk to and some of their questions and some of their comments. Usually I would do this interactively and do questioning and answering for everything, but because we're so spread out, I'm going to save the question and answer interactive portion towards the end. So I will tell you about how I do it with audiences, and then I will show you how I do it with the audiences at the end. So first of all, the most obvious thing is looking at an object. What can it tell us? Go into a gallery and don't look at a label. People spend usually about 19 seconds with a work of art. Most of that is spent reading the label. So I really encourage people when they go into a gallery to look at the object first, try to find meaning, try to find what it's about, look at the label, and then see how that changes what you saw, changes what your first impressions were. So what objects can tell us? Looking at this, I would say to my audience, so first of all, the question that I always start with is, what do you see here? And I would probably get the answer, a basket. Okay, what kind of basket? What is this basket used for? Carrying things. Well, let's look at it closer. One of my favorite phrases, form follows function. So if we look at this basket, this is actually, I'll wait to tell you what it is. So we look at this, and it has that sort of conical shape where it kind of tapers in there. This is a berry basket. The shape saves the berries from crushing each other. It is made of cedar, which repels rot, so it keeps them fresh. You see the top there with the little loops. That would be used to put leaves through, thrashing leaves through, to keep them fresh. So this is all made with beauty in mind, but also with form and function in mind. Let's see. So this is a Klamath style basket. It is made from coiled cedar root. Okay, so this basket, looking at it, the shape of it, and I don't know if you can see how it tapers in at the bottom, and the tightly woven twining of it. This basket is made to stick into the sand, and that's why it has this point here. So that way it can stick into the sand, it won't fall over and spill water. So this is a water basket, and the inside would have been covered with pitch. which makes it even more watertight, as well as the tight weave. So who would use something like this? And that would be Paiute, who live in the Great Basin in the desert. So that tells us a little bit about who uses it too. Now this version is really small. It's about this big, and it is a model, which would have been made for the tourist trade, but it is based on a larger model. So these would have been quite large, these types of baskets. Here's another one. And you'll notice this one has this open weave here. So what could that carry? It's certainly not going to carry anything like, berries, which could come out, or anything small. It is a clam basket. It is used to gather clams from the water, so then the water pours out. It is also used to steam clams. So it can go into boiling water, which would have probably been in another basket that was tightly woven. And these are all traditional forms. And we'll talk a little bit about non-traditional forms in a minute, but these are all traditional forms, what we call even ancestral forms, because they've been around for millennia. And this is actually a contemporary version of a traditional clam basket. And this was made by the artist Lisa Telford. Another thing that objects can tell us is a little bit about the people who made them, maybe where they live, what was important to them, their environment. And this is one of the oldest baskets in the museum's collection. It's a Klamath basket. It's from 1835, and it has, as you can see, these horned beasts, which we believe are elk, and then up here you have a hell diver, which is a form of grebe. So this is a coastal community, and so it reflects the fauna found in the coastal community. As I said, it's a Klamath basket from the 1830s. And also what it's made of. This is sweetgrass sedge, cattail, cedar bark, seagrass, dune grass leaf. An ethnobotanist can look at a basket and tell you exactly where that basket came from by what it was made of and where those plants and fibers grew. Here's another one, and now we're leaving the Native American, and this is one of our oldest works in the collection. It is a Chinese guan, which is a ritual pot, and this is from the 3rd to 2nd millennium BCE, and so it's prehistoric. And it was made by the river peoples around the Yellow River, and they believe that this form here, this hatching, represents nets, fish nets. So that tells us, I mean, if we had come across this not knowing anything about where these people came from, that could be, an idea. Oh, look, they drew something, they had a design that looked like a fish net. Therefore, they obviously lived near water. And these things, they seem kind of obvious, but when you start to talk about these things, especially with young kids, it really gets them to start to think about what they're seeing and to really think about what an object can tell us. And of course, this is our Egyptian relief, another one of the older pieces in our collection. And just looking at something like this, how people dressed, so they're wearing a little kilt. Won't they get cold? No, they lived in warm climates. So, it tells us that. It even tells us a little bit about how they looked with the hair. Maybe not so much the body shape with this, this strange composite profile here. And that's where cultural conventions come in. But something, as obvious as the clothing there really can tell us a lot. And we'll talk a little bit about how this was used, and that will tell us even more about this culture. This is from ancient Greece, and it's a fish plate. So not only does form follow function, it tells you what you're eating. And this would tell us that these are people who lived around water, probably the ocean. I mean, you see here, you have the wave pattern here, and then you have the 3 fish here. And these fish are actually identifiable. You've got 2 varieties of perch or sea bream here, and you have a torpedo fish here, which are Mediterranean fish. The shape is a little concave, so it kind of goes in, and then you have this hole here in the middle that would hold the condiment, olive oil or some other, condiment. So it's sort of like a modern day chip and dip plate. And this was made by the 3-stripe painter. And when you see an attribution like that, it means that there's another work of art or another example out there that can be attributed to the same artist. And they don't know the name of the artist, but it's alike enough that they give it a name that kind of identifies it. And he uses a lot of 3 stripes. So that's where he got his name. So that's why it says it's attributed to it, because it looks like another work by this same artist. Okay, another thing that I find after working with this collection for over a decade is that you start to make connections. Maybe things that you don't see at first. I mean, I've been at the museum for over 14 years, and I'm still seeing things in works of art that I hadn't seen before, or finding something else in the collection that relates to something that I have seen. So it's really a dynamic process, and you can make a variety of connections. Within cultures, this is a Corinthian pot. It's a perfume pot. So it's quite large. It's about this big. And this is from, oops. Oh, I've gone too far. This is from 5th to 4th century BCE, and it's, as I say, it's from Corinth. And this sort of illustrates what was going on in the Mediterranean at the time. A lot of trade, a lot of influence, especially between Athens and the colonies, and especially with Corinth. So this perfume pot would have carried perfume, oil, in large amounts. It would have been traded across the sea locally, and then it would have been bought by a merchant who would then transfer it to smaller vessels. And these are about 3 to 5 inches. And you can see that it's made to hold something precious. It's got the really small neck. You have the larger bottom that holds the precious perfume, precious oil. And then you have the smaller neck and this really tiny opening so it doesn't spill when you pour it, so you can pour it very carefully. And this is an alabastron that's Corinthian, so that shows, the trade within Corinth. And then you have a lakitos, which is from probably Athens, with the red clay there. And again, different shape, but pretty much the same purpose. Olive oil probably, an even longer neck. So again, that slow pour that keeps the precious oil from coming out too fast and from spilling. So back to form follows function. We can make connections between different cultures This we saw was from Egypt. Relief of a servant. So this relief would have been in a tomb. It would have been there to serve whoever was buried there in the afterlife. When they were buried, these people would come alive and be there to make sure that that person was happy and comfortable in the afterlife. So you can see that he is leading what could be a goat. You can see the front there. So we know a little bit about their ritual practices from their artworks. The same with the Chinese. This is an ancient Chinese. There are two, actually, figurines. And these are also ritual figurines. These are called Mingqi, and they're spirit objects. And it's sort of the same premise. People are buried with these to serve them in the afterlife, to entertain them in the afterlife. This probably would have been part of a parade, a military parade, or with entertainers. These are drummers. You can kind of see the drum there that he's holding there. So these are smaller. They're about this big. But if you know of the emperor from the Qin dynasty who was found with the really large army, that's what they're based on. And before they had these entertainers, they buried them with real people to keep them company in the afterlife. Okay, so you can make connections across time, and that's actually what we call our galleries. Our gallery is across time. And these are a relatively new acquisition, and they're skiphoi, drinking cups. Skiphoi being the plural of skiphos. And what you see on there is the owl. And it is the Athenian owl. The owl is associated with Athena, the goddess of wisdom. So you have the owl, and you also have the olive leaf here. And that is another of Athena's attributes. And looking at this, you can tell people the story of how Athena became the patron deity of Athens. And that is, she and Poseidon were vying for the position. So Poseidon comes to the people, and he puts his trident into the land and outspouts a stream. And the people are all like really impressed by his, display. It's pretty impressive. But the water is salty because he is the god of the sea. So they're not so impressed. So Athena steps up and she puts something in the ground. Not very impressive, but from it grows the olive tree. And the olive tree becomes the basis of Athenian and Greek society. It drives the economy. You can eat the fruit. The wood can be used for building. The oil can be used for lamp lighting, for cooking, for trade. It basically moves the economy. So Athena won the competition, and she became the patron deity of Athens. And the olive tree is still on the Acropolis today. So you have this image, this owl image, and then we have our coins. Oops, I'm going backwards. And here again, this is a silver tetradrachma. And this is from 450 to 440 BCE, Greek, Athenian, and this was one of the most used coins in ancient Greece and the ancient Greek world. It was found all the way to Afghanistan, and it was used into the 1st century. It is a head of Athena, and on her helmet she has the diadem that has the olive branches, and on the back you have that same owl with the olive tree, olive branches there. And I was going through our database recently, and I found this. And this is a 1994 print by Manuel Izquierdo of the owl. And if you know Manuel's work, he's very much interested in classical art, classical themes, and classical iconography. And then going into the kitchen of the museum, this is on our refrigerator. Our director went to Greece and brought this is a refrigerator magnet that he brought back from the Acropolis Museum. So it is still used as their main iconographical symbol. Another way of making connections is we have two works in our Christian galleries, and they're both illustrations of legends. This one is an icon, and this is a panegyrion, which is, it holds the wafer, the bread for the host, or the host, for the Virgin. It's her portion. So it's fitting that there is the icon of Mary and the Christ child. And if you're familiar with icons, there are types of icons. They have been around for centuries, and they are written instead of painted over and over again. And this is a specific type of icon. It's called the Hodegetria, and it is she who points the way. And it's Mary gesturing towards the Christ child, and the Christ child giving a blessing. It's kind of hard to read because it's kind of dark. And this is a small, it's about this big. So this image supposedly was first painted by the Apostle Luke of Mary when she was living. Now, there's no historical evidence for that, but during the 8th century, during the iconoclastic controversy, it gave this image divine legitimacy to say it was made of the Virgin when she was living. So any subsequent example of this same type would be legitimate. And then you have another legend that's also on view in our gallery. Right now it's resting because it's a work on paper, but occasionally they are up together. This is Georges Rouault's, it's one of his series, War and Mercy. And this is the last of the series, and it is the image of the Veil of Veronica. And if you're familiar with that legend, Veronica was on the road when Jesus was on his way to Calvary, and placed her linen over his face to wipe his brow, and his image came off on the linen, and it was supposed to have healing powers. So again, not based in historical fact, but a very strong image, and it is actually part of one of the Stations of the Cross. So both of these are direct images of divine beings. Okay, so another aspect of teaching from the collections is exploring cultures and challenging preconceptions. And this is something that I do in the Native American galleries, in our Grand Ronde galleries. Surprisingly, a lot of visitors to those galleries believe that Native American art was something that happened in the past, and it's not. It's artifact. And what we try to do in that gallery is to stress that it has always been diverse, it has always been dynamic, and it still is. So there are a couple of ways that we do this, and our galleries are called ancestral dialogues, conversations in Native American art. So what we have here are a lot of contemporary artists having dialogues with their ancestors' works. And I usually start with this little display, and it's 3 dance caps. And I ask people, which one do they think is the oldest, the newest? And usually I'll get, this one is newer, and that one is newer. This one because it looks modern, the design on it looks modern. This one because the materials look newer. So this one is the newest. This is from 2001, and these 2 are both from around 1900. So what I'm trying to show is a contemporary cap made by Bud Lane, who's an artist from Siletz, and he is in conversation with his ancestors using traditional forms and traditional materials. You can see he's using the same hazel, spruce, bear grass as both of these. This one is from Southwest Oregon or Northwest California, because remember when these divisions were made for states, it had nothing to do with where Native Americans were living. So the Siletz have more in common with Northern California than they do with a lot of the people that they were put onto the reservation with. So another thing this shows is this revival of traditional techniques. Bud Lane is instrumental in reviving basketry, making it more popular, learning techniques that had almost disappeared. He's also responsible for helping to revive the Athabascan language. So there's been a push, especially in the last, I'd say, 25 years, to really revitalize techniques and traditions among Native American communities that have not been lost, but have been almost lost or not considered as important through a variety of reasons, assimilation, the love of modern technology, for a variety of reasons. And then you have works like Lisa Telford's basket, which we saw earlier, which is from 2000, and this basket, which is Tlingit, from the early 20th century. So that'd be about 1900. And both traditional forms, both using traditional designs. This is a fret pattern or a key pattern, which was found in pre-contact weavings and was adopted by the Hudson Bay Company for sale to a native clientele, native market. So both of these are traditional forms using traditional materials, but you see the introduction of non-traditional dyes, whereas before with the caps, those were all traditional dyes made from roots, from bark, from dirt, from mud. But here you have aniline dyes. And you have the aniline dyes in this early one from 1900, which shows us that even in a traditional basket or a traditional work, you have the introduction of what we call maybe non-ancestral forms, like beads, like aniline dyes that were introduced in the 18th and 19th century and were adapted because they liked them. These were things that made dyeing easier, or made, instead of doing quill work, you could do bead work, which was easier, and it was, beautiful. So you see that same thing with these traditional forms. These are fez hats from the Plateau region. Here you have one from pre-1940 using beads, and most people think of beads as traditional Native American. And they've become, part of traditional Native American art, but they're not ancestral. And then this one, made in 2006 by Joey Lavador, is made from Pendleton wool. So again, a non-traditional material over or using a traditional form. So again, different types of conversation with ancestral forms and with ancestor artists. Okay, so another thread that goes through the gallery is the inspiration, and that is the world around them. I mean, all artists are inspired by the world around them, and nature, the land, the people. We have these two versions of vessels, and the top one is a Northwest Coast canoe, and these are models, so these are miniatures. Northwest Coast canoe, and this would be based on a real canoe, and scale-wise, I mean, it's to scale. So, and it even has the form lines that we would find as the designs on a Northwest Coast canoe. And Northwest Coast is British Columbia, Alaska, and up into farther north. And then we have this kayak model here, which is made of, again, it is to scale, and it is perfectly kitted out like a canoe, like a kayak would be. It is made of leather. It is built exactly like a kayak, a full scale would be built. These were probably made for children, and then they became made for the tourist market. You'll notice that a lot of things made for the tourist trade are miniature, because tourists seem to really like small miniature things. So you have the artists who are looking around and portraying their life ways, basically. And then you have this contemporary version. This was made in 2010 by Al Kaloke, who's in Inupiat up in Alaska. And how do they get around today up there? They get around by Super Cub, by seaplanes. So taking that traditional inspiration and applying it to what life is like today. And this is made of ivory, bone, baleen, and there's a little gem there for the light. You see the same thing in design. You see a lot of abstraction of nature. And here you have, back to the coiled cedar root basket, you have an organic design from nature that has been adapted to the grid of the basket. So this is actually, and we know the name of this design. Sometimes we don't know the name. For the most part, we don't know the name. But this one came with a name, and it is a Salmon Gale basket. So that tells us that this design is a Salmon Gale. I had never seen a Salmon Gale before, but this is what it looks like. So the artist has taken this organic form and translated it into the basket. Back to Joey Lavador's hat, just the name of it, Rattler. So now you can see that it is the rattlesnake. Now this basket is Klamath Modoc, which is down in southern Oregon. I use this example a lot with younger kids, as well as, this works for all ages. Asking them if the artist was looking around to be inspired by this design, what would he be looking at or she be looking at? And in this case, it probably would be a she, because most basket weavers traditionally were women. And so I get a variety of answers. Some people would say water. Some would say waves. Some would say mountains. Some would say snake. And they're all right, because this pattern actually has several names, including mountain, water, snake, not only because it looks like snake scales, but also because of the way the snake moves. And these names would vary depending on the tribe, the family, the individual weaver. So this could be, any of those. Then we move on to this basket. And we do a compare and contrast. How are they the same? How are they different? And, of course, the shape, the use. Obviously, this is made for use. This seems like it's more for decoration. The size, this one is really tiny. This is quite large. This is made of natural fiber. This is made of glass. The design. What is this? This is a chain link fence. And it's interesting because this is an abstraction of nature, and this is a direct representation of nature. But this is urban nature. And it's by Joe Feddersen. It's called Chain Link. And it is from his Urban Indian series, which is based on the premise that he is an urban Indian, and when he looks around, this is what he sees. This is his nature. The pattern is based on the mountain pattern, which we saw in the earlier basket, and he calls it mountain because that's what his aunt called it, and his aunt taught him how to weave. And she passed along her patterns to him, and he has translated it into, what he sees around him in his daily life. But you can see that there's still the references to the plateau baskets in the patterning on the glass in the background. It kind of echoes the basket weavings. So one of the things that, the big question that I like to ask is, consider the question, what is Native American art? Because the things that we have been seeing, the basketry, the beadwork, that is what people think, typically when they think of Native American art. And I have had people ask me, well, what makes this Native American art? And, the simple answer there is, this is a Native American artist. He is Native American, so therefore his art is Native American art. And the same with the Joe Feddersen. But you can see that they hearken back to their ancestral, it's the ancestral dialogue at work. Even in this painting, it's about the land. It's about how the people are informed by the land, their relationship with the land. But it is very much grounded in the language of modern abstraction. James Lavador is one of the best-known Native American artists living today. He has shown at the Venice Biennale. He taught himself to paint. He's a self-taught painter. But when you look at his work, he's from the Umatilla Reservation. That's where he grew up. You see Eastern Oregon. And he will tell you that if you say, oh, I see a river, he'll say, no, you don't see a river, you see paint. He is about the process of paint. He is about the properties of paint. But our minds want to make associations. And I like, this is where I say it's a little metaphysical, because he says that it's paint, but there's so much of the landscape in there. And the way that he paints it echoes the building up and the tearing down of the land over millennium. And he kind of paints in this sort of figure eight movement, and he scrapes and he repaints, and then he starts to block out areas. He believes in flow physics. It's like when you put cream into coffee and it disperses. So he'll take his canvases and turn them around and let the paint just go where it wants to. And you can see that here. But inevitably, someone will say that that looks like the turbines out in Eastern Oregon. So, which came first? I have had students tell me that they see buffalo here. And is that because they see buffalo, or are they making those associations? Another question that I like to pose: should this work of art be down in our Northwest collection and not in the Native American Gallery? Which would be the best place for it to be shown? And that brings up questions of, it fits in the Native American Gallery because it's so much a part of that story and that conversation, and it shows visitors what Native American art looks like today. But it could be down in the Northwest Gallery because he's a Northwest artist, and he's part of that conversation too. And there are no answers. There are mostly questions. Marie Watt, who's working very much in a postmodernist vein, but again, she is having that conversation. This is one of her blanket towers, and the blanket tower evokes the totem. It evokes the cedar trees of the Northwest. It is made from cedar. The base is cedar. The blankets themselves, in Native American culture, blankets are given as gifts. They're given for graduation. They're given for weddings. We make associations with blankets as comfort, as home. But then there's also the association of Native American blankets that are diseased. So she's kind of bringing that in there too, maybe attempting reconciliation or just stating that this is how it is. Postmodernly, she is creating performance art. A lot of her blankets are made with help from other people. She does sewing circles. They can put, some of these have silk and satin bindings on them. These blankets came from a call to the community to donate blankets and give the stories of the blankets. So you see the little tags there. They tell the story of each blanket and how this person used the blanket, what the blanket meant to them. So that is all becoming part of the work of art. And that's very contemporary. It's very postmodern, but it's also very much grounded in Native American life and culture and history. Okay, how are we doing on time? So, yeah, we can do a break now. Any questions?
Is it questions now or break now?
Break? We can do a break.
Okay.
We have time for 5 minutes of questions.
We can just do a break and we can do questions at the end.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So break now.
Or you prefer?
Start again at 2:30. That's fine.
Okay. So I'm going to try not to turn my head when I speak and not to swirl my pointer. So I apologize for that. Okay, so we've been talking about objects and looking at objects. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about painting. And one of the things that is surprisingly left out of conversations about art is the parts of art. Usually it's about the meaning of the painting or the meaning of the work. And no one wants to talk about how the artist has used the parts of art. Sometimes they do, but it's not the first thing that they go to. And I think that a lot of times that they're just not sure how to talk about it. And so one of the first things that I do with young kids, and it's the easiest thing, to start a conversation about art with them, is the parts of art. And that includes the elements of art, and these are the parts of art. I just kind of use that as a term that refers to it all. But professionally, they're broken down. The elements of art are line. I'm turning my head again, aren't I? Okay. The elements of art are line, color, shape, form, texture, space, and value. The principles of art are pattern, contrast, balance, proportion, unity, rhythm, variety, and emphasis. So what does that all mean? And you're not going to talk about all of these things each time, but these are things to keep in mind when you are talking about art. And I always stress to my docents, remember, you're in an art museum. Talk about, the parts of art. So this is a really good painting to start with the basics. This is by Spencer Mosley. It's The Jugglers. And this can be used for, sometimes I'll get groups who are like in first grade or kindergarten, second grade, and just introducing the parts of art to them. And most of our tours are question-based, so it's not who sees red, it's tell me what colors you see. We talk about the primary colors, red, yellow, blue. Then we can talk about the secondary colors and how they're made by mixing red and yellow to get orange, blue and yellow to get green. You can see there are shapes here. There is line. There are straight lines. There are curvy lines. There are thick lines. There are thinner lines. There are vertical lines. There are horizontal lines. Back to shape. You can have, this is perfect for, you have shape, this oval shape, and the shape becomes an ovoid. We give it form by adding modeling, and you can see that there. This one up here I really like because it's basically a scalloped rectangle, and then you put this shading here and it becomes wavy. So it is creating 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. And these are ideas that you want to get across to young kids. And we're sort of giving them the tools. Think how an artist thinks. An artist wants to create something. He goes to his toolbox or her toolbox, takes out their line, their shape, their color, as well as their paintbrushes and their paints. This shows us pattern. You've got simple pattern down here. You've got more complex pattern here. You have instances of shading and tinting. From white to gray, you add black. That gives us a shade. From black to gray, that is a tint. You add white. So these are things that you want them to start thinking about. Here it becomes a little bit more complex. We're talking about space, perspective, how you create perspective, how you create, again, more 3-dimensional. You have, it's done here by overlapping, simple overlapping. It's on the same plane, but because you put this little spear here in front of the circle, the spear looks like it's in front of the circle when they're really right next to each other. You can do it by size, things that are smaller tend to look closer to us. We have transparency here too. So again, this conversation is getting a little bit more sophisticated. And then you put it in a scene. You talk about the expressive qualities of the elements of art, of the parts of art. We talked about the line, and we talked about horizontal lines, which you can see here. We talked about vertical lines. Here you have tons and tons of diagonal lines. And what do diagonal lines bring to a scene? They bring movement. They bring a dynamism that is missing if it's just straight up and down and, straight side by side. You have logs that are acting as lines. So they're like thick lines. You have stalks, that act as lines. You have the bodies of the dragonflies that are lines. And, not to mention the various leaves that you have here. The fish are really lines, they're curved lines. And then you have the circles. You have, the rolls, the shading. Look at how you can see here. This is a really good example of how an artist has used shading to create, to give form to a flat surface. And that would be the little cattail there. And down here, the way that he's used shading to show how, the leaf is bending, the stalk is bending. We can talk about the light source. It seems to be coming from this direction because we've got shade over here. So they really start to think about how these things can work in a scene that they might see as realistic. A scene that they might see as everyday. Then I would ask them, is this a realistic scene? And for the most part, it is realistic. It's recognizable. They can tell what it is. But it looks a little cartoony. It doesn't look like something that we would really see with our eyes. Then we talk about how the artist has taken these basic shapes, and sort of abstracted them, sort of like what we were talking about up in the Native American gallery with the abstraction in the mountain pattern. And you have a little bit of that here. This is really a good example to talk about the expressive qualities of art in the color blue. It's a cool color. Describe your day here. What's the weather like? What do you hear? We can hear the sand or the trout jumping and making splashes. We can hear the buzz of the dragonfly. We can maybe hear the rustle of the leaves. What does it smell like? So this is when you start to get their senses involved and really get them talking about what they see. We can talk about how pattern becomes texture and talk about implied texture versus real texture. Implied texture is what we see here. It looks like it should feel if we could touch it in real life. But again, if we did touch it in real life, it would be a flat surface painting. But it should be kind of fuzzy, and the little dots on the logs are texture. That shows us that the log is rough, So these are the kind of conversations that we have with younger audiences. Then we're moving into the close-looking phase. Now, remember I said that people spend about 19 seconds looking at a work of art. So what we usually do on our tours is we choose just a few things to look at. We don't want to look at everything. Hopefully people will come back. Because we want to have conversations about just a few works of art and to really get the students, to get the audience, young and old, to really look at what they are seeing. And this is a really good one to spend a lot of time with. And I worked with the Boys and Girls Club this summer. And I had the best group, and we had the best conversation about this painting. And basically, this is one that I was hoping to do among us, but I think I'm going to save the conversation to the last painting. So I'll just tell you what our conversation was like with this one. So I asked them, started out, what do you see here? And, I would get room. And then what is the mood here? And we started talking about how, the room looked empty. It looked old-fashioned. There was an old-fashioned TV there. It was really well lit. It kind of looked spooky, a little mysterious. Where were the people? Where were we in the house? Well, we were upstairs because we can see that there are stairs leading down there. Oh, look over here in the mirror. There is a reflection of a window. So that means that we are part of the painting, where the painting kind of goes out into our space, the viewer's space, because the window is behind us, the viewers. So they start thinking about the use of space that's not just in the painting. It's things that happen outside of the painting. So that's a concept that's introduced to them. Then I asked them, so let's talk about how the artist made this. What parts of art do you see here? So we talk about the lines. The most obvious thing that jumps out is usually these lines here. But these lines also become little rectangles. Then you have the circle of the mirror and the square of the TV. And this is mostly geometric shapes. You have the circles up here. Then you have this wonderful barrel shape. So that is given some form, some 3-dimension. We talk about pattern. The slats on the rail here form a pattern. It's repetition of an element, of one element. You have down here the register, which is a pattern of little squares. You have, even this is a pattern of radiating circles. So, you've talked about how he has taken all of these parts and used these tools to create this scene. What about the way that he's used color? What colors has he used? Well, he's used your basic primary colors, and that's basically all he has used: red, yellow, blue. But he has taken the yellow and given us tints and shades. So let's say this is the yellow here. You have a shade. Over here we've added white, so that gives us a tint. And these are all conversations that we find this through conversations. It's not me telling them like I'm telling you. It's me asking them and having them tell me what they see and where they see it. And that is what is behind question-based touring. So after we've had this conversation about this, next to it is this painting, or this photo, I should say, because this is a photograph. And there are 2 ways to do this. And one of the things that I do is compare and contrast. How are these different? How are they the same? And how are they similar? Well, of course, they're both upstairs. They both have kind of a mystery to them. There's something mysterious about them. How are they different? Well, the obvious. This one has people, this one doesn't. So if we go back and look at this one, we talk about this and what's going on here. What do you see in this painting or this picture? So it's usually, it looks like these girls are looking for something that they shouldn't be looking for. They look like they're sisters. Why do you say they look like they're sisters? Well, they're all about, they have the same, someone said they had the same dirty blonde hair. That was, I think, a little 7-year-old that said that. And what about the way that they're dressed? Well, they're kind of dressed in old-fashioned clothing. But they're sort of the dresses are similar. And then they talk about where they're standing, how these two look afraid, and this one doesn't look as afraid. Then we talk about how the artist, again, has used those tools. And it's a little bit different here because it's a photograph. So they talk about color. You know, he's used, or she, this is Holly Andrus, she has used red and green and blue, pretty basic colors. And the way that they are posed is very much in a triangular composition there. If you look really closely, there is sort of a light that's kind of glowing right here in the basket. I mean, in the drawer. It's kind of coming out of the drawer, and it's kind of reflecting on her face. So they're thinking that she has found something that she shouldn't have found, that scares the other girls, that she looks pretty interested in. So a lot of them make connections to, you know, they say it kind of sounds like a mystery. I've had a couple of girls who say that it is very much like their Nancy Drew books, and Holly Andrus was definitely influenced by the Nancy Drew covers. You can see using the kind of retro clothing. These are from the 70s, I think the late 60s and early 70s, these covers. So they make that connection, kind of building on visual literacy, you know, things that they've seen out in the world, they can see in works of art. Now, for adults, I would talk about this is about the mysteries of becoming a woman. And that's what, you know, it's one of the underlying themes of this series by Holly Andrus, this Sparrow Lane series. It's a series of girls in this kind of old-fashioned house, kind of discovering all these mysteries, just at the very, you know, at the edge of like finding out something, but not quite there. And it relates to that idea of becoming a woman, of, you know, entering into adulthood. So we do have a little bit of that discussion with the younger kids, and with the, you know, with the teens, we do talk about the underpinnings of about you know, adulthood and becoming a woman, and, you know, just the mysteries of life. So those are two paintings and pictures that can really give us a conversation and have us not just look at one painting, but look at another, and then compare and contrast and see how the same type of images can work in different ways. And then if I ask them, which do you prefer? Do you prefer your stories told, you know, where you supply the characters, or do you like having the characters supplied for you, you know, so they're telling the story? And that's, you know, a conversation that we have. And of course, it varies by person. So they will tell you what they like and what they don't like, and which one they prefer and why they prefer it. And I believe in people not liking a work of art. You don't have to like a work of art, but you should be able to say why you don't like a work of art for whatever reason. And the more that you express your critique, you know, it really helps you articulate what you're seeing, and it helps you understand what you don't like, and then maybe the more that you understand it, you come to appreciate it. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people that said, I didn't like this when I first looked at it, but now that I've spent some time with it, I do like it. So, you know, it's all valuable when you're in the galleries. So, okay, can we do the close looking now with the audience? Okay, so we're not going to use microphones, so I will repeat what anybody has to say. Can everyone see this? Can they see the details? And I'm not going to tell you who this artist is. If you do know who it is and you're familiar with him, oh, I just said he's a man, familiar with the artist and the artist's work, hold off your comments until later on in the conversation. So this is what we call close looking. And this is basically, it's also called slow looking. So it kind of came about around the time that the slow food movement came about. So it's one of those, you know, spending time and really enjoying what you're seeing. It's about finding meaning through looking. Artists, the meaning that the artist is trying to get across is only half the story. Is it important that you know it? Not necessarily. It can certainly add to what you know about a work of art, but it's certainly not necessary. Half of what you bring to a work, probably even more, is your own experience, your own knowledge, your own likes and dislikes. Most artists will deal with something that's universal, something that appeals to everybody, that is understood by everybody. It might come from a place of biography, but it's something that we can all relate to. So, that said, I am going to put it out to you. What do you see here? And start with the obvious. Yes. You think that's a volcano? Can you see? Okay. So we have a volcano. Anything else? Someone says Portland. Why do you say that? River, bridges. Okay. Yes. You see an angry woman. What makes you say she's angry? Okay, her arms. But what's missing? Well, there are two things that are missing. There is a black cat. And what does the black cat tell us? Omen. Omen. Is it a good omen or a bad omen? Sometimes it's for us in Western culture, it's mostly bad, but in some places, it's a good omen. Even in Germany, sometimes it's a good omen. But what about, there's another cat there. What else? Lightning. So like up there. Okay, someone said dress. Who said dress? What about her dress? It's shaped to her legs. Someone said what? From the waist down, she's dressed. Can you see what's going on from the waist up? What? And she's nude. Yeah, she doesn't have a top on, and her arms are folded. So what else do we see? Eggs. So we have eggs balanced on the sill. We have eggs balanced on what is this? Yardstick. Smoke going up from a cigarette. And look where it goes. It's going off. What else? Is that a mirror? It looks like a mirror, but what's it reflecting? I mean, that's just a question. Yeah. What else? Here? Can you see? Can anyone see? This is why you should be in the galleries. It's a flame. Yeah, so there's a flame there. And then, what's this? What does that look like? Paper. Paper it looks like it's nailed. And what's this? Toilet paper. Okay, what about the space? Do you notice anything about the space? It's kind of harder to see in this than it is when you're standing in front of the painting. It's a balcony. It does seem like a balcony, but look at this. So you come in this way, you go up here, come across here, and this goes all the way down here. So it's very ambiguous space. It's almost like an Escher space, it just doesn't attach, it doesn't work. So she's in a very ambiguous space. And the perspective, I mean, she's kind of tilted up. It does look like she's levitating, doesn't it? And why do you say she's expecting someone? You think she looks like she's waiting? If we could see her face, I think we would have a better idea. But her face is completely obscured, so we have to take the hints from her, her militant arm folding position, which seems, as I said, militant or defiant. And then the way that she's seated is sort of, her legs are splayed. That's kind of casual. You think it looks sexual? Okay. You had something back there.
Everything seems to be
Flying or floating. Unmoored, sort of. Yeah. To the right of her body, my right or... Like, not that. Yeah, that is a flame. Yeah. You can see, it's mostly the smoke of the flame, but at the very bottom, you can see that there's a flame there. Yeah. So glass tower, you think she looks... Okay, so we're outside maybe, and you say that you said something over here? The smoke, yeah. So let's talk about how the artist has painted this. Oh, one of the things that we haven't even noticed here? The color. Lots of red. And what does red mean? Violence, fire, passion, It's not an easy color. It's not a quiet color. It's not a cool color. If this were all greens, it would be completely different. So let's look at the way that the artist has painted it, the color that he has chosen. Just the reds. Even her body is red, the sky is red. Look at the lines here. We talked about I'm sorry, I'm going to do this. We talked about the expressiveness of line. And there's very few, well, there's some straight lines here, but a lot of them are like just crazy dynamic diagonals. And, the swirls up here. And you have this one line here that goes out, and who knows what it's doing over here. Then it comes up and goes like that. This shape is echoed in this toilet paper over here. You have this curtain that is blowing up here that is echoed down here in her skirt. You have, just this, the way the cats are jumping are echoed here and in the smoke there, and even in the smoke coming out of the volcano. So there's a lot of like swirling and diagonals that are intentionally put there. He's really thought out this composition and given it balance by echoing these shapes in different ways. But we have at the front this woman who is facing us. Her back is to whatever is going on in the back. What could that mean? Yeah, everything, there's chaos going on in the back. And she's got her back turned to it. So the black cat is something she's thinking about that's forbidden. Okay. So these are all things that we, are bringing to this. And we've talked about, well, let's talk about this. I mean, what would these mean right here? Floating, the what? Oh, that's a votive candle? Those are eggs. Yeah. But what about the way that they're balanced there? They're fragile. So we're on the edge of something happening, especially like here. This thing is ready to fall. And what about the fact that it's on a yardstick? A measurement? You said something over here? It does. It does. And here, I mean, they can't be too steady up here either. And this is burning out. And in the painting, you can see that these look like they might be lit. I can't tell when I'm looking at the painting, and I certainly can't tell here, but, it's something that I think about when I'm looking at this. So we've got all of this going on. What does it mean? Well, I think we've come up with some meanings. It's chaos. It's, yeah, you had something. On the edge of Armageddon. That kind of goes with your lunchtime talk. We're rounding it up. So, there is a white cat down here. Well, it's a kind of a calico type cat. So what was the artist trying to tell us? I mean, we certainly get this sort of uncertain, on the edge of change, on the edge of uncertainty. You know what he calls it? Black Cat Mountain. This is George Johansson. He is a Portland painter, and he painted this in 1982, I believe. I won't even look. We'll say 1982. And he was a painter, or he is a painter, but he was also a professor. He taught art at PNCA. At that time, it was the Portland Art School, Portland Art Museum School. Now it's PNCA. And he was a teacher there for a very long time. It was for most of his career. And he decided to retire and pursue his painting full time. So 2 days after he retired, Mount St. Helens blew. So he kind of saw, as it's all working together. So here is a man who is embarking on a new part of his life, saying goodbye to his old life, sort of on the edge of something new. Something's going to change. We have all of the universal symbols of change, which would be flame, the rebirth after fire. You have the exploding mountain, certainly going to change, and then fire in the sky. You have red, which is about passion, about, it's not quiet. Something's happening. You have, I'm not quite sure what this, maybe a reflection on what's gone in the past, a reflection of what's coming in the future. But again, it could be the future because it's not showing us anything. I like to think of this as a to-do list, and this as what happens to the to-do list. So, and then some of his personal life, more of his personal life comes in. The cat is definitely an omen. I mean, we see it as an omen in our culture. And it's also very personal. His wife rescued cats. And this is a cat that he owned. They are both cats that were part of their family. So again, the personal becomes the universal. And the fire. When he was starting out his career, he belonged to a gallery, the Fountain Gallery in Portland, and it burned down, and most of the body of his work burned down. So he uses that motif of fire often in his work, and it's not necessarily always a bad thing. It's about change and rebirth and building yourself back up from the flames, much like the phoenix, comes up from the flames. You have Portland in the background, and he lives up in Goose Hollow by the Vista Bridge. So a lot of his paintings have views of Portland. And he is very much a student of art history. So he takes that cue from the Renaissance painters who would use scenes of Siena and Florence in their pictures of the Holy Family. The Holy Family didn't live in Italy, but it was very much a Renaissance convention to use contemporary cities when talking about the history of the Bible. So he's taking his cue from that. He also, with her back turned to the chaos, he did a series that he called The Ship of Fools. And The Ship of Fools was a medieval concept, and a lot of art was made where people are on a ship, having a grand old time and partying, and the plague was going on. So you have skeletons in the background, and these people are just, completely ignoring it. So she's got her back completely to it. So there's a little bit of that in it, but mostly it's this combination of the personal, the change. How do we measure our life? How do we, anticipate change? So he's giving us both, and because we looked closely, we could figure out a lot of that. Because we have visual literacy, we have, we know about universals, we know our own personal experience, and we bring that to a work of art. So this is where not looking at a label right away, spending some time and really thinking what you can, get from a painting, from the way that it's painted, from what's included in the painting, when it's painted, and then, look at the label, and then kind of, if there's some explanation, think about how that enhances what you thought, maybe challenges what you thought. Does it matter? Do you have to go with what this person said? Not so much. I mean, it's up to you to, get from a painting what you want to get from a painting. So that is what I wanted to go over with you today. Before I leave, I wanted to show you a few of my favorites in the museum that I have come to know and love over these years. And it's from repeated looking and repeated walking through the galleries and finding things. They're not the obvious things, They're the things that kind of grow on you. So that's why I always recommend repeated visits to the galleries. You have never seen it all. So I call this favorites. The small, the missing, and the hidden. And I didn't realize that these themes were there until I started looking at my favorites, and I'm thinking, the small. This is a little ivory pendant in the Native American gallery, and these would have been, there's several of them. One of them, my favorite, is actually the seal, but we didn't have a picture of that. But I just find them so charming, and I love that the little fish is smiling there. But these would have been attached to clothing. It's just one of those everyday beauties that you find. And this is a netsuke, another accessory for clothing. This would have been used to anchor a rope that would hold a box on an obi on a kimono. So it's basically a toggle, and the back of it would have a hole in it. And these are little tiny, tiny, tiny figures. Some of them are not even an inch, but the ones that we have are like 2 inches. They're made of ivory, and carved, intricately carved. And I like this one because it shows a European that you don't usually see. A European with his big fat cigar, his waistcoat, and he's got his servant with him. So you see a lot of, again, it's reflecting the daily life of the Japanese. And these were really popular, especially in the Edo period. Even when they started dressing in Western clothing after they opened to the West in the late 19th century, they still made these, but they left out the holes in the back. So when you look at the various pieces in the collection, put your head around the back to see if it has a hole in it or it doesn't, because some of them were used for actual, toggles, and some were used just because it became a work of art in its own right, and they used them as little sculptures. This is the missing. I seem to like things that aren't all there, and makes me think about what's missing. So this is an Egyptian eye, and it's beautiful, just the shape and the alabaster and the dark stone. But it's from a funerary mask, probably, or some sort of wooden mask that has probably disintegrated or had been destroyed. It was found in Thebes in the necropolis. So it's just one of those little things. And this is the beauty of the original object. It's that kind of wow factor, the thing that has been around forever and you're actually seeing it. And you can't get that from a slide. You can't get that from the internet. So, this is what visiting museums is all about. Now, I think this one is my absolute favorite. This is the head of a female saint. And she's missing quite a lot here. It was practiced in the Renaissance and medieval period to create these saints using expensive ivory for the face, the hands, the feet, but everything else would be made from wood or real clothing. So she was probably dressed in, a real garment. She probably had hair. The little nodules around her head would have probably anchored a wig, maybe a halo that was probably made of gold. Her eyes were probably painted. So there's a lot that's missing here that kind of, you can think about what was there, but just looking at it, there's something very modern about her. I think of like a Modigliani, just that long face, very symmetrical, and just that quiet, contemplative look on her face, and done without very much color. And then I realized that my favorites don't seem to have a lot of color, so I don't know what that says. This is another one from the missing. This is an album of sketches. We don't even know who the artist is, and this is out in the Asian gallery in a long case, and occasionally we'll change it because it has a front and a back, and so we can flip it over and you can show different pages. But I like this because it shows the use of the empty space and how much you can do with empty space to create your scene. I mean, most of this is white space, the river, the sky, but he's created this, this impression of this shimmering landscape. And the way that he has used, just the paint here to create reflection. And they say that in Chinese brush painting, which this is an example of, that has been, this influenced Japanese painting, there are 5 shades of black. And you can kind of see that here, from the lightest gray to, the darker colors of black. And most Chinese and Japanese ink painting is done with, it's very much about the way that you handle the brush and the way that the brush flows on the page. There's not a lot of lifting of the brush. It's how it moves and the expression of the movement of the painter comes through. And this one, this is the hidden. This is a sheet of prayer invocations, and this was found in a large Buddhist statue of a Buddha from the 11th to 12th century. It was renovated in the 20th century, and they found these inside, and they used these to raise funds. So they sold these off to raise funds to restore the larger statue. But what's so interesting about these is that people would use these as sort of prayers to the Buddha Amida. And the Buddha Amida is the Buddha of Pure Land Buddhism. And that was a way for most people to gain enlightenment. Upon death, if you repeated the name of the Buddha Amida, he would be there to greet you upon your death. So this is sort of a physical emanation of repeating the Buddha's name. So the more times that you printed this, the greater your blessings would be. And it's an early form of Japanese woodblock print. And I just love it because each one, it's the same, but they're different. And they're rustic, but they're very complete. And I think they're really expressive. And talk about the parts of art. You could break this down to line and shape. So that's one of, and then this one. I'm ending with this one. This is a Chinese bowl. And if you look at it here, it's just this, this regular bowl here. And then on the inside, it has these 5 red bats. And I like this because it really illustrates the Chinese love of puns, of homophones, and of rebuses. We can break this down with the word for bat, fu, is the same word for blessings. It's pronounced the same way. It's not spelled the same way, but it's pronounced the same way. So, pardon me? Did someone say something? Oh, sorry. So that's fu. And then you have the word red, which is hong, which means many, which also means many. So it sounds like the word for many. So it comes out to be many blessings. And since there are 5 of them, it stands for the 5 blessings. And I have to look those up because I always forget one of the blessings. And that is, let me see here. The 5 blessings are long life, health, wealth, love of virtue, and a peaceful death. So all of those things are expressed here through these 5 red bats. And that is learning to look. So, any questions? Any questions? You did a great job with the close looking. You have a question? Yeah. It is strange. And it was about, what do I think about the new Da Vinci that was discovered and just sold for $450 million? It's funny because it was sold as part of a contemporary art sale, and some art appraiser or art historian said, yeah, that's because most of it was done during the 20th century. So I really have, I don't know. It's it's kind of amazing, and I really don't know. Yeah. Well, I think that this is a thing to think about when you go to a museum. Think about where things are placed, and that kind of tells you its importance. And if you didn't know anything about the Night Watch or about Rembrandt, you would walk around the corner and say that has to be an important painting because of where it is displayed and how, its place of importance. So that tells you a little bit about how we construct culture, as well as receive it. It's interesting because the man in the golden helmet, which is also a Rembrandt, well, it was attributed to Rembrandt, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. They found out it was by someone else. So does that make it less of a painting? What is its value? Why is it less? It's still the same painting, So these are things to kind of keep at the back of your mind when you're going through a museum, through any museum, and when you're reading what a curator says. That's one person saying that. So always think critically. But there are reasons why those things are so beloved and so well known, because they're pretty fabulous. But yeah, these are kind of interesting conversations, and they're conversations without answers.
Hi, this is James. In fact, just last night I was looking at the Hollyanders, and usually it's on the side to the right as you're entering the room.
Yes.
Now it's on the left at the back of the room. It's usually in the front. And I was wondering, I was looking at the relationship with the other paintings and trying to figure out the thinking of the curator for that.
Well, that would be me. When we redid the galleries, we did them thematically. And there's a narrative section, and there's an identity section. And we first put it in the identity section because it dealt with female identity. And then when we redid the gallery recently, we moved it over to the narrative section because it's basically storytelling, So that's kind of it, And the beauty of that gallery is that we wanted to look at works of art in different ways. The first painting that I showed you, the Spencer Mosley, that used to be an abstraction in form and expression. And I moved it to narrative because it did have playing cards and roses in it. And those two things, while they're not really storytelling, narrative can be associations, symbols that we see that make us think about things. Cards and love, right there. So did that answer your question? Yes. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you.